Welcome to The Liberation Effect with me, your host, Helen Villas. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Liberation Effect. Today, I'm talking to Patrick, who is coming to discuss what is the difference between abuse thoughts and autism thoughts. So I'm actually going to just hand it straight over to you, Patrick, and say, is that accurate? And what are you looking for from our time together today?
Yeah, I think that's completely accurate because, for me, it is a case of sometimes constantly battling between having had an abusive upbringing and
Right.
still dealing with that abuse from time to time.
Sure.
How has that shaped how I look at the world and how I look at other people versus I was recently diagnosed with autism, and
Okay.
it's made me think, is a lot of it to do with that, how I think about other people, how I relate to other people, and the things that I struggle with in terms of trusting people and having relationships, which I find very difficult, social situations. Now, I think, is it to do with the way I was brought up and how I was treated, or is it an inherently autistic set of traits that are causing me problems? And I think really what I want to get out of our time together is some way of helping me to sort of separate them or identify them, which is some tools to coping with those thoughts moving forward.
It's a really interesting question. And I think it's one that people who are autistic or even ADHD or any kind of neurodifference are going to go, this is exactly what I want to understand. And so my first question, I suppose, to that would be, what difference will it make to you to know the difference? How will it change things for you?
I think because when I got my autism diagnosis, it kind of made me feel a lot more relaxed in terms of I felt like I was always searching for an answer as to why I was the way I was, if that makes sense. Right. And when I got the autism diagnosis, it kind of helped me to calm down and feel more at ease with myself, thinking, okay, that's why. There's a lot of that's why. But then as that kind of journey has gone on, I still think to myself, like, but is that everything?
Okay.
Is that the answer to everything? Or is it that, there's parts of it that's to do with abuse and parts of it that are actually maybe made worse by the autism or are purely to do with that. So it's still a journey in that respect, I think.
Absolutely. And I suppose I'm wondering, when you say, actually, could you give me an example of a thought that you've kind of gone, oh, well, I do that because it's autism? Or
I think when it comes, I suppose one of the things that I struggle with more than anything that pops to mind as soon as you ask that is the social interaction side of things. I've always found social interaction really difficult.
Right.
And I feel like it's because the reason I feel conflicted is because I had a mother who was like, you have to be perfect in every situation.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're not, it's a bad reflection on her.
Yeah.
You're showing me up and you're making me look bad. And so it's this constant, I've got to be perfect. I have to say the right thing, be polite, have my manners, be well mannered. And then I'm kind of thinking, but I know that parts of some people with autism have real problems with social interaction because they can't actually relate to other people. And so I know that I find it difficult to relate to other people. So I'm kind of torn. Is it because of one thing, or is it this side, or is it the two things together combined, making actually one very difficult situation to deal with?
So when you say you find relating to other people difficult, in what way might that?
So I struggle to understand what people are perhaps thinking. I don't understand people's emotions. Very often I don't understand why somebody is perhaps panicking about something, or they're getting upset about something that I wouldn't get upset about. Or I always remember telling the joy, sometimes the joy that you see on people's faces in a certain situation. I don't understand it. I don't understand why you find or how you're getting joy out of these things. I remember when I was talking during my autism diagnosis that I actually feel quite robotic sometimes. Like you're supposed to react in a certain way, but I don't actually feel it.
So you never experienced joy or excitement, or?
I feel like I used to.
And
these days, I almost feel like I've used it all up somehow. That's kind of how it feels sometimes, is that over my lifetime, the joy that I did feel in things I've used up. And I don't really feel it now.
What things would have provoked joy in the past?
I think like the excitement of like going on a holiday or catching up with friends, having hobbies,
Okay.
all of the things really that like that I used to enjoy going out to do and look forward to doing. Now it feels like everything's a bit of a chore, going out and seeing
Right.
people and wanting to get. And I'm always sort of saying yes to things, but then not wanting to do it when I get close to them.
Yeah.
It's like an anxiety that kind of creeps up on me, and I visualize all the ways that it could go wrong and conversations in my head with people that haven't happened that I think will happen, worst case scenarios.
So you're anticipating things being difficult
Yes. Yeah.
when you're with
I think that's what it
people.
is now, is that everything seems to be, feel like it's just going to be a challenge. And it's kind of mixed in with another thing, which is I find that I don't trust people generally. I find that I've just had a lot of bad experiences with attracting the similar types of people into my life and, into my mother. And I think I seem to have I've had so many bad experiences with that it's tarnished my entire kind of view of humanity. Which sounds an awful thing to say, but...
Well, no, it does, because if everybody you come across turns out to be harmful, of course you're going to...
That's it. So, that kind of, I suppose, then bleeds into where the joy is I don't really, I don't really feel it because I'm always in the back of my mind thinking it's something bad's going to happen. So
that sounds like being in a hypervigilant state. That you're so conscious of protecting yourself, you're not able to kind of be present moment to experience the
that's it.
joy.
That's absolutely it. Looking for exits and looking for when we've done the main thing. Can I go now? Because we're done. I don't need to stay here for the socializing part afterwards or anything like that. It's like I just want to get back to my safe space.
Okay.
And I never thought I'd be like in my life. That it has become like that.
How long has that been in place?
I think now I would probably say it's probably been about 10 years. It's being like that. It's feeling like that.
And what happened 10 years ago?
So the thing 10 years ago was probably the worst point for me with my mum.
Okay.
And I got into a really bad habit of drinking to sort of block out the depression to deal with, because I was still living at home at the time.
Right.
So I had a long challenge with mental health problems, with depression and anxiety. And my mother could not deal with the fact that I was drinking, which I perfectly accept, and it'd be difficult for anybody. I was drinking quite heavily. But her way of dealing with it was screaming and shouting and threatening and being abusive, rather than being supportive and trying to help me through it. There was absolutely no love there at all. There were points where she was physically abusive, physically threatening, laughing at me when I was saying that I was feeling the lowest I could ever feel in my life, and swearing at me, all this kind of stuff. Things that really need from your mother. It is horrendous, and it's taken me a long time to see that, because when you're living with it all the time, it's normal.
Of course, yeah.
And it's only when you tell other people and you see that reflected back at you that you realise just how disgusting it is. I don't want to go into some of the worst parts of it because it's horrible. But that for me was kind of a breaking point, and then I kind of left home. I just left and ended up being picked up by my brother and brought 160 miles away from my mother to make a new life. Literally just picked up and taken away.
Okay.
So that was the worst point for me. And I think it's from that point onwards, it feels like I'm having to rebuild some sort of sense of who I am. And I think I still don't know who he is.
Absolutely. And that obviously this huge amount of trauma. So you've developed a coping mechanism. You're coping with depression, undiagnosed autism, anxiety as well. Yeah. And drinking or any kind of substance misuse is a hugely, and I hate this word, normal reaction to those things, right?
Yeah, so I've realised.
Yeah. And so 10 years ago, when you were your most vulnerable, like super duper vulnerable, where you're using the alcohol to cope, where it's so bad that you need the alcohol to cope, instead of being kind of wrapped up in, cotton wool almost, and, supported into helping yourself, you were just being berated, shamed, and physically and emotionally abused.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I had no escape. None.
Okay.
Because I couldn't go anywhere. There was nowhere I could go to escape from it, which sounds silly because you can just go out the house and just, and I mean, I did. There were points where I was just leaving the house it was awful because I was, I've never really admitted this to anybody, but I think it is important to talk about. But I used to just go out with a bottle in my bag, jump on a bus, going to like the local town and just wander around all day rather than be in the house.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'd be stuck in town because you missed the bus or you can't afford a taxi back or whatever, and I'd just be there overnight just to get away from it, and so that was a thing. But when I was back at home, I couldn't escape her because she would just, she'd barge in my room and start shouting at me, or, I'd try and go into a different area of the house and she would follow me and sit there and start, jabbing at me, and, we'd end up in massive arguments, and it was just, very, very difficult to cope with.
I mean,
being almost, it felt like you're being hunted all the time, hunted out, and
so you were prey.
yeah, that's kind of what it felt like. And actually, that's it's an interesting thing. I mean, until this point in this conversation, I don't think I've ever thought of it like that. But it's actually a very powerful image for how she was. I feel like there were times where I felt like she felt so uncomfortable with who she was and shamed by who she was that she wanted to make me feel worse.
Yes.
And get some of that out onto me.
So she punished you for her own self-loathing.
That's kind of how I felt in the end. Yeah.
And so just out of interest, sort of as a sidebar, would you consider yourself as a child? Were you the scapegoat child?
I don't know. I can't really remember. To be honest, there's a lot of my childhood I cannot remember.
Okay.
And I think it may have swung between myself and my brother.
Okay.
At different times, depending on what was going on.
Yeah, that's normal. Well, normal is, but
I think, if my brother was doing better, then I was the bad child. If I was doing better, then he was the bad child. Because I think a lot of it was to do with how we made her look.
So you had to earn your position as golden children, and it would swap in and out?
That's probably how I would put it, yeah.
Which also might... Okay. Little bit of puzzle pieces maybe falling into place, but I wonder if... So do you have any contact with her now at all?
No, it's been, and that's only been recent in the last year or so. Myself, my brother, my sister-in-law, we've all made the conscious decision. That is it.
Okay.
We're not having any more to do with, because she's, on another note, my brother has children, young children.
Right.
And neither of them make any effort with those children whatsoever at all.
Right.
And my sister-in-law's given them time, chance after chance after chance,
right,
to be part of their lives, because it's, ultimately the children are separate from this. If they want to have a relationship, they want to have a relationship. We can't tell them no. I think now it's got to the point where she's got, no, we're protecting you from grandma and granddad because they are not good people.
Well,
and so that's happened in the last year. We've all consciously made a decision. I think also because I opened up to my brother about the full extent of what happened to me.
Okay.
And so he's now realised that, that's not something we should have in our lives.
Good.
No.
Good.
To answer your question, no, there's no contact. Sorry, it was a long way of explaining there's no contact.
It's a really good context, because actually what's really great to know is that your brother and your sister-in-law are on board. That thing about the children having their own relationships, I feel, I don't know, if you've heard me talk about this before, but I feel very strongly a narcissistic parent, they become a narcissistic grandparent, and if they're abusive, if you have to protect yourself from them, then you have to protect your children from them, right? Okay. So how long have you noticed this how long since you became aware of this, not being able to trust people, feeling quite kind of hypervigilant and stuff? How long, have you been aware of it?
I think it kind of developed probably in my sort of mid-20s. So I think it was probably about maybe 15 odd years.
Okay.
15 kind of going on. And I'm not quite sure what triggered it. I think it was a combination of events. To be honest, I was working, I used to be in corporate IT, management. So I had quite a high-powered, high-pressured job. And it was kind of salesy as well. So there's a little bit of dealing with, salespeople, and we all know what that can be like. You think the pressure of that somehow I feel like somewhere along the line, it just sort of like broke the last thread I had of holding on to reality and holding
Okay.
on to my sanity. I feel
Okay.
like because I was dealing with pressure at home, I was dealing with pressure at work. And then all of a sudden, I feel like I broke, and it was just like, do you know what? People are just awful. People are
Right.
just awful. I can't trust people at work. I can't trust people at home. I can't trust, I do have a couple of good friends that I've had throughout my life, and they've never treated me in a bad way at all, right?
Amazing.
I can rely on them as a barometer for how human beings I would like them to be,
Yeah.
But that's kind of a drop in the ocean to the amount of people that I've met in my life, and the majority of them have ended up just being transient friends, and you feel like afterwards, you were only there because you wanted that from me.
Right.
You were only there because you wanted that from me, and now
Yeah.
you're gone. And that kind of started happening around my mid-20s.
Okay. So your experience of people is that they are there to benefit from you.
Yeah. Take advantage, I feel like sometimes, because I feel like I'm the kind of person who I will talk to anybody in a room. I used to talk to anybody in a room. I used to want everybody to feel welcome, and I used to be open and try and want to find common ground with people and
Mm.
talk about, especially if they had an interest that I had an interest in as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
I could talk to them for hours and hours and hours, right? But I feel like people saw that openness and saw kindness, maybe. I don't know what the word might be for it, to be honest. But I feel like then they were like, oh, that person, he's going to be easy to manipulate.
Mm.
But no one, also, the initial signs of being manipulated, I don't really notice it.
Okay.
I've just had just to say, I just had a French person that I knew that's just broken apart because she turned out to be exactly like my mother, but I didn't see it,
Okay.
which I find terrifying.
It is terrifying. And there's the crux, right? Because you say, I can't trust other people, but actually it sounds more like you can't trust yourself.
Yes. I wonder sometimes if that's what it is. I can't trust myself. I can't trust how and I think this is where it bleeds into it. Is it because of, is that a double whammy of having been brought up with this is normal to you because this is the chaos and the drama and the abuse. That's normal to you, and that's why your head feels stable almost because that's what you've grown up with. Actually, I can't trust my own brain because this is where it bleeds into, is it an autistic trait as well? Because I know that with, some people who have autism, it's like they cannot see those things happening to them right in front of their face. And
Well,
I
so,
can't sometimes.
yeah, so there is truth in that. So autistic people are more, and ADHD people, more vulnerable to being emotionally abused simply on the basis of that they're not very necessarily, not always, but sometimes not very good at seeing the sort of subtext to someone's
That's,
behavior, right?
yes.
And
Yes.
and so that is absolutely going to be part of it, but that is managed through education, through
Yeah.
self-reflection, through connection, slowing connection. So with ADHD, we see, because there's so much dopamine with the kind of reward of making a new friend, it's like that dopamine of the kind of contact and the building of the relationship and the common interest and the new thing almost becoming new person, almost becoming a special interest, and then kind of almost not being able to see past this like huge amount of dopamine that's coming in. Go on, you look like you've got a question.
It's a kill if I get struck a chord actually,
Okay.
because that feels very familiar, that
Okay.
feeling.
Yeah.
And I've always felt like I have quite an addictive personality.
Yeah.
I think that's where the alcohol got a hold of me as well.
Yeah.
I feel like if I'm ever going to do anything, it's to the fullest. I'm
So
not going to just do a little bit of it.
did you get assessed for ADHD as well?
No, just autism.
Might be
I have questioned it
worried.
since. I have, because I think again it helped me to understand quite a lot of things, but I don't feel like it ticked every box. So
I mean, I saw a video yesterday that said something like 75% of autistic people have ADHD as well. Something, I forget the exact statistic, but it's quite staggeringly high, that if there's autism, we should be assessing for ADHD, and if there's ADHD, we should assess for autism as well. Because now there are a lot of overlapping traits too. So there are lots of those. But then you've got trauma involved, and that also makes you really vulnerable to emotional abuse and addiction. Okay, because you said earlier when you were telling the story about taking a bottle and getting on the bus and kind of staying in town overnight,
Yeah.
that was the first time you've ever told anyone.
Yeah.
And my heart broke for you a little bit in that, because that would suggest that there's a lot of shame that you haven't processed yet.
Oh God, yeah, absolutely. Because aside from how I was kind of felt like I was conditioned to be this model person, model human being, yeah. My father was a police officer, right?
Right,
So
okay.
when we were very disciplinarian,
Right.
a massive disciplinarian. So we had that going on. I think that kind of also made us sort of fear being naughty as children, and also not, being bad as adults, and I always felt like we could never behave in such a way that would break those rules, right? So there was that. I was also a police officer myself for 2 years.
Right,
I
okay.
joined as a special constable when I was 21. I
Cool.
did that for 2 years. So again, it was like, this law-abiding kind of person. Now, there's nothing illegal about drinking, but it felt wrong to me, and I felt ashamed that I was this person. I felt ashamed that I was this person who was, going through a bottle of vodka every day,
Right.
and running off into town and being one of those alcoholics you see on the street. That's how I felt, and I felt ashamed of that. And I
Yeah.
still feel ashamed, I think, of being that person. Now, I understand that I was doing it. And actually, there's so many people since then who've said to me, you weren't an alcoholic, Patrick. You were in pain. And
Yeah.
it was like a medication for you. And the proof of that is that the minute I was brought away from it, the minute I came up away from my mother and that situation to where I live now, it stopped. And I've been sober for
Right.
6 years.
Right.
And I have
What?
no desire to drink, none.
So let's reframe this a minute then. Let's reframe this idea of. So first of all, I just actually want to go back and say my belief when it comes to substance misusing, and I don't know again if you know, but I've got my own history with that, is that the reality of it is that every single human that I have met has had trauma and is in pain and has developed a coping mechanism. And I don't want to sit in the camp of Gabor Mate, who says all addiction is trauma. I don't want to sit in that space, because that's not, as far as I'm concerned, true, in that there's got to be a
No.
genetic and environmental influence. So, there's all sorts of different things. But what I would love to reframe for you is how clever you actually were in that moment. That there you were, feeling completely powerless, completely without direction. You had no support, but worse than that, you were being abused regularly. And you went, then I need to escape this situation. The only way I can do that is using vodka or alcohol. And the only way I can do that is by leaving the house and taking the alcohol with me to do that, to stay away, to stay out. And so actually that alcohol will then dull my sense of obligation, my fear of their retribution for staying out, for not, there's actually something, whilst it's, I hear, and I don't want everyone going, Helen's saying that we should all be like abusing alcohol. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying you took power where you could. You helped yourself where you could. And as you say, the minute you were out of the environment, you didn't need that coping mechanism. So look how clever your brain really was. And let's see it as you surviving a really shit situation, rather than you being, and I'm putting words into your mouth, but you being weak or not strong enough to cope with the situation you were in. What do you think of that? That's got you a little bit.
It has, yeah, because I've
Yeah.
never thought of it that way. I've never thought of it that way. I felt like it was I'm going to use the word, I felt like a failure.
Yeah, of course.
I
Of
did. I
course you
felt like
did.
I failed because I couldn't, I couldn't, I couldn't. I think what it is, and you'll know this very well, I'm sure, is you can't argue with them.
No.
You can never get your words out to them. You can
No.
never get your point across. And even if you do manage to articulate it, there is a million gaslighting, twisty, turny roads that they will put you down.
100%.
And so it's frustrating as hell because you cannot ever get it out. And even now, I can't get it out.
So then you can never be understood.
That's it. And I think, it felt like a failure to just drown in a bottle of vodka. That's kind of how it felt at the time. But actually, that's kind of helping me already reframe it.
Yeah, because look at the shame was never yours. Look at what
No.
environment created you. The environment that you were in created a need to survive, and that is not your shame.
No, it's taken a while for me a while and a lot of education, to realise that she is who she is. She's never going to change, and what came out of her was never about me.
Ever. Because, and why, how do you know that?
I think being clear and free from her.
Okay.
And realising that all the things that she would shout and scream and preach at us were things that I know she didn't like about herself.
So just remember, one thing you've already said to me is that it didn't matter what you say, you couldn't get your point across. And I said to you, so you were never understood. And so what that then means is that you were never known. And that therefore means it was never about you. Because if it was about you, she had to know you for it to be about you.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I hadn't thought of that either. That's a great way of putting it. I don't think she cares to know who we are.
Other people are extensions of themselves. To the narcissist, other people are like placeholders for various things they feel about themselves, which is why like the scapegoat becomes the self-loathing. You said it right at the beginning. Her self-loathing was put on you. And it absolutely was, because she, for whatever reason, saw something or projected something onto you that she does not like about herself, and then punished you for it. There's also the thing of creating a dependency and then punishing you for having a dependency. Come home, come home, come home. How dare you come home? And it's like, oh my God,
Yeah, absolutely. You can't win. You can't win. But the interesting thing throughout that is that you almost feel like the dependency of like, this is your safe place, this is your home, this is where I know you always seem to be drawn back there, even though it's a hellish place to be. But it felt like it was. I can't get my head around that sometimes. I find that really difficult. That I always felt like actually, if I just go home, it's all fine again. But it's not at all.
So you bought into the lie?
I suppose perhaps I did. I'm not sure.
And was there a hope that it would be the safe place? Was it
I think so, because the cycle of the sort of I've done something awful, but then I'll behave for a couple of weeks and be nice and maybe buy you something or help towards something with money. It's always about money. It's never about anything. It's never about anything. Physical or doing something that actually makes a massive difference. It's always about, well, I bought this and I paid for that. I think, but that's not love. So I think you go through that cycle so many times, you keep believing in it. And I suppose in my head, it was like, but she's my mother. There has to come a point, surely, where a maternal instinct will kick in. And she will start to realise, oh my God, that's my flesh and blood that I'm doing this to. But obviously that's never going to happen.
And you blaming yourself too, because you're feeling like a failure?
I think I'm over the stage of if I was a better son.
Good.
If I achieved more.
Good.
Because I've recognised the perfectionism in myself. The idea that if I'm perfect, then she will. But I just think it just won't make a difference. It won't make any difference to her. I could sweep the roads, or I could be top professor, PhD in wherever, and it wouldn't make a difference.
No, because the bar would move, and then and someone else would be. Because that's again the thing about perfectionism for the narcissistic parent, is that you finally get to where you think I've done it, and then they go, oh no, actually it's up here, and it's constantly moving, so you're never ever able to achieve it.
No.
So let's go back then to the thing around trust and other people and relating to other people, because I find it really, well, actually, I'm going to check this in with you. How are you feeling talking to me right now?
I think there's a sort of, I mean, the in my insides is kind of squirming and going a bit crazy.
Sure.
But I think knowing that you're talking to somebody who is, who knows about this makes it easier.
Okay.
It's talking to somebody who actually understands makes it easier for me.
Okay.
But I do, with other people, I think there's an inherent trust here because I know that you are who you are and you know what you're talking about. But with other people, it's like I feel I wouldn't be able to talk about these types of things or open up to other people because it's going to be used.
Right.
Just the general person on the street.
Sure.
I
get
or
that.
even friends. Certain friends I wouldn't. Or certain people in my life.
Okay. So what is it about them that makes you feel that you can't open up to them about any of this?
I think it's just the way that they behave. Like they never seem like very interested or invested in actually who you are as a person. It all seems very superficial.
So then that begs the question, which is quite confronting. I'm trying to remove the word brutal because it's not brutal. Somebody told me off on the hub the other day, "You're not brutal, you're honest, Helen." I was like, okay, I'm going to try and really internalize that. So it begs the confronting question, why are they in your life? Because that sounds like your mum.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like sometimes I don't have a right to say no.
Okay. This is going to come back to trust of self.
Yeah, it is. And it's I have a huge issue saying no.
Okay.
Massive. I can't say no to people. I feel like I'm not, I suppose I don't feel like I have the right. I don't feel like I'm enough to say no to somebody else. Who am I to say no to you? And it's like everybody else has power over me. I don't have any power over myself.
There's a learned helplessness in it.
Yeah, it's the biggest thing I struggle with is saying no.
What's the fear?
I try to say to myself, upsetting other people, losing things, losing contacts, losing more family, being alone, stuck alone, disappointed people, letting them down, loads of, it's the catastrophe, that's that catastrophizing of, if I say no, the world's going to end.
So do you know what's really interesting and weirdly serendipitous is just before we started, this morning I've been recording a course on people pleasing for the Hub, which is my little membership community thing. If you're scared of rejection, of saying no, have no idea how to trust people, you're not alone and you don't have to heal alone either. That's what the Hub is for. It's a membership community designed for survivors just like you. Every month, we dive into powerful courses, we hold live calls and connect in a supportive, understanding space so you can break free from the past and build healthy, fulfilling relationships. Maybe it's time to stop surviving and instead start thriving. Visit jointhehub.ac today using the code POD20 to get £20 off your first month's membership. I can't wait to see you there. Take care. Bye.
Yes.
And next month, I don't even know when this is coming up, but in April, the course is going to be people pleasing. And one of the things I am talking about all the way through is that kind of the fear of rejection, the fear of abandonment, the fear of loss of relationships of people. And from standing up, speaking our truth, saying no, or I don't like that, and the fear of conflict and what that then means, because especially if you grow up in an environment where, conflict was a regular feature and it was either terminal or used to silence or then resulted in abandonment, whether emotional or physical, conflict becomes this really threatening thing. And saying no, of course, can trigger that, or saying or disagreeing or having a different opinion. And the thing that I kind of keep going back to in the course is every time that we people please or don't say no or whatever it is, when we're fearing the rejection, the abandonment, the conflict, what we're actually fearing is feeling toxic shame from experiencing rejection, abandonment, and conflict.
Yeah, and I can see that connection.
Yeah, and
I can see that connection, because no was not a word you could use.
Right. So what happened if you said no?
They'd be punished in some way. I mean, it would, either a physical punishment or, not going to talk to you for the rest of the day, rest of the
Okay.
week. Something's going to be taken out of your life. You're going to lose something.
So no is
So,
just horrendously threatening for you.
horrendously threatening,
Okay.
horrendously threatening. You
Okay.
know, and it's not just saying it, but it's hearing it sometimes as well.
Of
That's,
course. Yeah.
it's when, because there were so many times where mum would be, she would just have, it felt like she would have like a cloud descend over her, right? It's like a veil would go in front of her eyes and she would be in a foul mood
You're right.
and you couldn't work out why. And she would never tell you. And I'm convinced she had a conversation in her head about something
Yeah. Without,
with
I'm
herself.
pretty sure you're right.
And that's it.
Yeah.
And that's your problem. And you've caused that. So, and then you would be trying to get out of her what's wrong. And you would be like, you just talk to me. And it would be that vicious no,
Right.
that I used to
Right.
hear. And it could be, it just, every time I hear somebody say no, I just hear my mother go, with that vicious kind of face and,
Right.
vocalization of no.
So when you hear the word no, you hear your mother. So when you say the word no, do you feel like you're being like her?
And it's kind of a double whammy. It's like, I'm going to be punished and I don't want to be her.
Okay. And then are you projecting onto the other person how they're going to feel if you say no?
I possibly,
Okay.
I possibly am. I possibly, again, I think I'd probably do the same thing. I'm having this conversation with myself in my head,
Maybe.
and I'm anticipating that they're going to say no, and I build it up and up and up and up until the last minute where I possibly have to, make a decision. And then the no happens. And, obviously 9 times out of 10, there's never a problem, but I can't seem to learn from it.
No,
It
because,
just will happen again,
well, it's trying to keep you safe, that fear. So all these
Yeah.
fears, all these coping mechanisms are about protection. Even like drinking the alcohol, that is protection, right? They're all trying to guard you. And actually, when we were talking about emotions at the very beginning and not being able to feel joy and things, and one of the questions that I was like, oh, I'm coming back to this and I'm going to ask you,
Sure.
how does it protect you not to feel those things? What happens if you feel them?
I don't know. I think I'm worried that it's going to activate a massive reservoir of emotions that I haven't let out, and that's going to be devastating.
Okay. So that you'll be overwhelmed and you won't be able to cope.
And I don't want to have another rock bottom breakdown.
Okay.
I'm trying to avoid that, but I know that but there is the other side of my brain that's saying, yeah, but you need really to deal with it and move on because you haven't, and it's still affecting you.
Yeah, it's that kind of double-edged sword of, I'll just pretend it's not there, but it is still there, but it's still hurting you, but I'm just not looking at it face on. So
that's it.
Yeah.
And the other thing when you say, how is it protecting me? I don't think it is, but when I look at my life now, I feel more isolated and more unable to react to be around people and interact with people than I did before. And I just think, that's because I think you built your walls up too high.
Well,
and I feel like I need to let them down a bit.
Well, there's a reason that you've built them up so high. Do you know why that might be? Can you think?
I think when it comes down to it, for me, it's a case of the one person in my life who should have been the most protective, should have loved you the most, should have done everything that they possibly could to give you the best start in life, didn't. And I think if she can do that to you, then you ain't got a hope. I think that's what it is for me.
So
that's how I feel.
Oh, well, that's valid. There's truth, and how is it that this person who is meant to love every fibre of your being could treat you in such a way? And if she can do it, it must mean that you're the worst human that ever existed, and that everyone's got the right to treat you like that. Because if your mother can't love you, then it must be me that's the problem. Or, sorry, if my mother can't love me, it must be me that's the problem. Right?
Yeah.
And yet, let me just ask, how long has she behaved like that towards you?
Oh, all my life. Pretty much all my life. From as far back as I can remember, there's been not definitely the narcissistic traits
Okay.
of, growing up hearing, you behave this way and you don't behave this way, and because it's a reflection on me, and everything being about the look of things, to the
Okay.
neighbors and to how friends and things like that. I can remember all of that. The punishments, the minute that I think it was the minute I started to be able to answer back and have my own opinions.
Well, I'm
When I
probably sure, fairly sure it would have been going on before that,
yeah, probably would have
you
been.
know, you would have learned very young not to say no.
Mm.
But our drive for autonomy gets stronger and stronger as we get older,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we had some fierce arguments because I didn't back down. I wouldn't back down because I was like, no, you have done something wrong, and I'm not going to stop until you understand you've done something wrong. All
And
you have to do is say sorry. It's not difficult. Just
right.
say sorry, but that's an impossibility, or it's a sorry you feel this way, or
Yeah,
sorry
oh God, that
if
old,
you
yeah.
think this. That non-apology apology.
Mm.
Uh, I remember that. That's littered in my childhood, and
Okay. And that's why autistic children tend to be scapegoated, because they are their sense of justice is so strong, and their ability
well,
to
it's
kind of see
huge.
what's right and wrong and fair and not fair is so strong that,
Mm.
and they don't really learn not to verbalize it because they don't recognize, or rather the drive for it is so strong that they fight for it, instead of the other children who are not autistic or ADHD are going to be going, well, just shut up because it'll just keep the peace, essentially, right?
Which is my brother. Yes.
Okay, there you are, right? And he's not autistic or
Yeah.
ADHD?
No, he's
No.
not. No.
Okay, so there it is, right? So you, being sort of a kind of justice warrior, put yourself in the path of her wrath more because of that, calling her
Yeah.
out, right?
Yeah.
And so you, of course, then feel the wrath more, and then therefore get the wounds more, and then learn more that the minute I reveal my true thoughts or feelings or stand up for something, I get annihilated.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
this message of me not being good is reinforced over and over and over and over again. But I wonder, with your emotions, what would have happened if you had been happy? How would your mother have reacted as a smaller child, as a sort of 7 or 8-year-old? How would she have reacted if you'd have been happy about something like going to a party or I don't know, some kind of childlike thing?
To be honest, I don't really remember a lot of that, especially younger, in the younger
Mm.
days. What I can remember, maybe is if you were happy about something that she didn't approve of, that was
Right.
never a good thing. I'm just trying to think. So there is a great, I mean, there's an example for me because it's one of the ones that I find the most awful to remember was when I was joining the police
Mm.
at 21. When I finally got my badge and I was attested into the police force, and I come home and there's quite a few people in the house at the time because it just happened to be that there was quite a few people in the house at the time. And like the minute I got in, every single person apart from mum
Mm.
was, how's it been? How's it been? How did you go? I'm showing my badge, and everybody's really excited for me. She wouldn't look at me, she wouldn't talk to me, she just left the room because she didn't approve of me doing it. So
What
there's
a
no joy for me that I've decided I want to do this, and this is something that's for me. She had to take the opposite stance.
right. If you now, as you now, could go back into be in that room when you walked in the door,
Mm.
what would you do? What would you say to her specifically?
I'd probably just, now, I'd probably want to go after her and say, do you know what? If you, whether you approve or not is irrelevant. Your son has achieved something massive, and you're going to walk away and leave. I
Amazing.
find that disgusting.
Right.
And do you know what's interesting? Actually, it's just made me think about it. Recently. I don't know why this has happened recently, but I've been having these dreams where I'm confronting her and saying all the things that I wish I could have said properly. And when at the time you feel paralyzed, you can't get these things
Yeah.
out. I feel like this is happening now in dreams.
Right. There's a
Seems
reason I'm
weird,
smiling.
but
It's not weird. There's a reason this is a wonderful thing. There's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. Have you heard of it? By
I
Bessel van
have. I
der
think
Kolk.
I've got it
Oh,
actually. I
right,
think
cool. Okay. So have you read any of it? Do you know any of it?
I think I've read it ages ago, so you
Okay.
might have to refresh me.
Don't worry. It's quite a hard read. So I
Yeah.
actually ended up doing it on audiobook because I couldn't cope with the print on the page. But he talks about resolving trauma, and this is a very common kind of tool that we do in therapy, is we say the unsaid things. So we recreate the situation. So if you were and I were doing therapy, I might say to you, well, imagine your mother stood right next to me here. What would she be wearing? What would she, I would get you to really kind of describe her as fully as possible and then invite you to say whatever it is that you needed to say. And the reason we do it is because, and this is how we stop rumination as well, is that we resolve the trauma by changing the script of it. So by being able to be the one that, the reason I said, what would you say if you went back as you now into that room is exactly this. It's because you get to say what should have been said at the time.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. You get to have your voice, not be paralyzed by the fear of her and her reaction. You get to say all the things that you wish you had said in the moment, but because of that fear and because of her control of you, you couldn't do. And yeah, so your brain is look at your brain's amazing. It's doing it for you in your sleep. It's saying, here's this bit of trauma we need to fix. We need to have a voice in. We need to change the narrative and the script of, let me do that for you. And that's a phenomenal thing. And it's also something you can actively do too for yourself.
Yeah, and I've there's been times before where I've tried to kind of do been through different therapies before, and people have said write letters or speak it out loud or whatever. And I have tried before to do that. It never really seems to have worked for me or felt like I was doing anything. But these dreams have been the thing really that have. It's a strange one because it's not something that I've actively thought. You're not conscious of it. It's just doing it. It's happening. But it seems to have been making me feel better about what happened with them, because my dad is not, he's not guilt free in all of this either, because he never stood up for me at all. He was of the ilk of, whatever, I'm going to side with your mother. It doesn't matter how old you are or whatever. If she says you've done something and you're in trouble, so even in my 30s, that was the case, She said you've done something. So I was having dreams about, saying to him, like, you cannot bully me anymore. I don't care that you are my father. I am a 41-year-old man. I'm not going to be told this by you.
Right.
I don't care who you are, And it's you should know what she's like. You do know what she's like because she's done it to you. So stop bullying me and deal with her. That's kind of what my brain is now saying to me.
Amazing.
But I think a lot of it as well is now living up with my niece and nephew. It's a very protective uncle instinct for them as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel joy when you think about them?
I do. Yeah, I do. Because I love them so much. Because I always felt like I never felt like I would ever have children myself.
Right.
And so I always looked at my brother's kids as mine as well.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting point, actually, talking about like mum and happiness, if something's made you happy. When my brother had his first child, when he was newborn, we came up to see him. We just travelled to where I live now from where I used to live. And we all came in the room. My eyes were firmly fixed on my nephew. Went straight up to him, tiny little bundle of sticks that he was at the time, little cute little thing. And I mean, a flood of tears, and this is my nephew kind of thing. She completely ignored him and walked straight over to the window to look out the window. I was commenting on the flowers in the garden.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I mean, I've got a fairly good idea why. What's your take on that? Why she did that?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure on that one. I don't know I don't know what it was. I don't know why she did that. I'd be interested to hear what you think on that, actually.
Well, I wonder if, and again, I'm open to obviously being wrong about it.
Yeah.
How does she cope? Well, no, actually, I'm going to give you another example. What's the similarity between your nephew being born and everyone going to visit and you getting into the police?
It's not about her.
Yeah, that's what I would say.
It's not about her.
So
Yeah.
she distracts, deflects, takes attention away from whoever it's about. So the nephew or your sister-in-law, perhaps, or even your brother.
Yeah. Do you know what? That's, yeah.
Is it just falling into place a little bit?
There's lots of other situations
Yeah,
now that are just, yeah, popping up into my head of,
yeah,
it's not about her,
exactly. How can I bring focus back to me? Well, I'll get up and walk out of the room and let everybody know I think this is a terrible idea and I disapprove of him joining the police because I'm just such a worried mother. And right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Not because it doesn't look good for me and I want my son to be, I don't know, prime minister or whatever it might be that she had lofty expectations of. But the thing of notice how anytime she's not center of attention, how she makes herself.
Yeah.
Whether that's through a look at me behavior or a remove her absence. You know, did your brother get married to his partner?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
What was she
Yeah.
like at the wedding?
I don't know. I feel like she kind of faded a bit into the background, which sounds a bit strange compared to with some of the things that we've been saying. But one of the things I've noticed about her before is that I find it if she's in a room where there's bigger energy and bigger power, she
Right.
kind of diminishes a bit.
Oh.
I know it's interesting. It feels like it's almost that's not how she would behave as the type of person that she is. I've often thought this as well because she has a lot of. Sorry to kind of go away from the wedding a little bit
No,
there,
you're
but
fine.
she has a lot of friends
Mm-hmm.
who are bigger, badder narcissists than she is, right? And
Okay.
there's been lots of them throughout my childhood that I can remember, and they've
Right.
always been very dominating over us, dominating over my mother, dominating over my father, even in our own home. And she seems to attract these people into her life as well. And so, but she sort of diminishes slightly in these people's presence.
Would you describe her as covert or overt presenting?
Covert, I would say.
Okay. And those people are more overt?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, definitely.
So that is 100% typical. So
Really?
coverts defer
Yeah.
to overts. Actually, I wonder if it's come out yet. There's an episode of, I do another podcast called True Crime Body Language with Paul Russell, who is a
Oh,
consumer
wow.
behavioral psychologist. And he and
Mm.
I look at various different true crime cases. We look at the footage and he basically tells me all the behavioral markers and things he's seeing. And we actually were discussing this the other day of, oh, I know what it was in. We recorded an episode, and it's not come out yet, on the Man's Family. And right at the end, there's a scene where there's an overt and a covert essentially arguing. And you see,
Okay.
and we talked about, like, well, you've just witnessed what an argument looks like. And the covert was very dramatic and, oh, poor me. And the overt was extremely calm and cool and just domineering and dominating.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the reason I'm just sort of showing that is just because the idea is that when people ask me all the time, do two narcissists marry? And the answer is yes, absolutely. When it's an overt and a covert together, what we typically see is a kind of handing over of power from the covert to the overt, but they're actually retaining an awful lot of power. So it looks like they're giving all this power over, but actually the gain and benefit they're getting from that overt being in their life is massive, and they're quietly controlling kind of all the situations and dynamics and stuff, but it looks like
Yeah.
they're very helpless. So if you think back to where these overts came into your life or your mother's life, and then her benefit and gain from those relationships, what do you see or think? Can you notice
Yeah. I mean,
anything?
I think, I think it was maybe she was getting connections, or she was having more of a social outlet than she probably would have done beforehand. So I can see that there's maybe a benefit. She's one of these people where, I mean, it's kind of, I could tell you what, my niece and nephew watched Keeping Up Appearances for the first time recently,
Okay.
and they said, that's Nana.
Oh, wow. Okay.
She's everybody loves me. I know everybody. I've lived here my whole life. I know everybody. Everybody knows me. I know everybody. And she's the type of person who will walk down the street and go to somebody and they don't even know who she is. But she pretends
Right.
she knows them, and she expects
Okay.
that everybody knows who she is, So, and I think that there is this thing within her that she probably knows that people don't actually know who she is, and a lot of
Right.
people probably don't like her. But by being associated with somebody who, because a lot of these people have they had like prominent, maybe prominent jobs in the community, so she
Right.
would know who they were, and then she'd be part of it by extension.
Right. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I think that sort of fits with what you're saying, really.
Yeah, that sounds okay. So I'm going to come back to your original question about
Yes.
autism and trauma,
Yeah.
because this is all really relevant to it. And ultimately, I think there's a definite identification of the idea that autism makes you more vulnerable in terms of not being able to understand people's subtext or motives necessarily. But what you've actually been describing to me is somebody who has got a relational pattern based in their mother's behaviour, and so that all the people that they've attracted have been like mum's behaviour, or maybe even dad's too.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so the kind of assumption in the very both trauma and autistic way of thinking of black and white, all or nothing, is that everyone must be this way, because I've seen it so many times. Here's my proof, here's my evidence. But you've also told me that you're scared to say no, and you're scared to kind of be honest about things and share your real human experience for the fear of that rejection. But that in turn makes you more vulnerable to emotionally abusive people, because they are relationships of silence and compliance, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When we've been conditioned and we haven't broken the conditioning of silence and compliance and agreeableness and, just deferring and keeping it quiet and people pleasing and doing everything for everybody else and not expecting anything back in return, or not even that it's in return in a kind of transactional thing, but not looking for reciprocal relationships based in equity. When we're in that space, we're horrifically vulnerable to emotional abuse and people who will exploit us, because people who want healthy reciprocal relationships are actually going to be turned off by people pleasers because they can't trust you, right? And actually, one of the very hard truths about people pleasing is we're trying to control other people by doing it, in terms of their acceptance of us, their rejection or lack of rejection, the conflict. And it's a really difficult thing because it's unintentional and it's not in the same way in any way. And it's not about having dominance or power or control. It's just to protect ourselves from feeling that toxic shame, right?
Yeah, I completely get that. And I know that I do that.
Yeah.
I know that I do that. And I know that if I just do this, then maybe they'll pay a bit more attention to me. And if I just do this, then maybe that by doing that, they'll come to see that I should actually be part of this in their life, and they should do this for me and that for me. And I know it's not healthy. I can recognize it in myself. It's not healthy.
But then the next question after that is, why am I begging for their approval? Yeah. Right? What is it that they have that I think is intrinsically more valuable than what I have? Why have I pedestaled them? What am I? Do you know what I mean? So
I do, and I find myself, but then like a couple of months after that, I'll look back and go, why was I so bothered about them?
Yeah, because at the time when you first meet them, the problem is, right, with the kind of people pleasing behaviour, which is I think what we're talking about when we're talking about this fear of no, is, and again, correct me if you disagree, and I'm not going to get cross if you say no at all in any way, shape or form. In fact, it will help. So am I right? Do you think that is sort of people pleasing type behaviour or not?
I think there is definitely people pleasing there. There definitely is. I think it's people probably going to, I don't know, I feel like you're going to get on better if you're more agreeable to people. If you like at work, if somebody comes and asks you to do something, you say, yes, of course, I want to do well at work and be seen as being good at my job and getting on. Friends need help and I can help them, of course. And but it's always, I never think of the expense to myself.
And there it is, right? Because yes, being kind and genuine, like helpfulness and kindness are wonderful characteristics, but it's about what it costs us to do that. So here's another project. Can you do this? Yeah, that's fine. Meanwhile, you're having like a stress burnout episode because you've got so much on. Instead of saying, well, I can do that, but if I do that, that means I've got to stop doing this thing. So which one do you want me to prioritize?
Yeah.
Right?
And this is the thing. I used to be able to do that.
Right. And then it
You know,
stopped.
yeah. Well, at work, and I think this is probably quite a classic thing. Is I had no control at home, so I was in more for quite controlling at work over my
Right.
job and because I had quite a responsible job, and I had people that worked for me, and I controlled huge revenues and margins and profit, all this kind of stuff. So I was really on it with my job,
Right.
and I was very good at saying to people who was coming along and saying to me, we need this and we need this and we need this. And I'm like, no, can't do all of that. And now what's the most priority? What's the highest importance? Blah blah blah. I'll delegate things out, and it's all done how I've, as we're describing. Since I broke down,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that it was lost. It broke.
Okay.
And now I'm desperately trying to get my way back to it, but I think it is that the anxiety, the fear of it again, and building myself back up to it.
It seems like there's a lot to kind of unpeel. Because when we come out of these kind of environments where we've suddenly realized exactly what's happened to us, and holy moly, there's been all this stuff going on, and maybe I didn't see all this stuff, and how is that impacting me now? It's that thing of your landscape, your worldview has been completely destroyed.
Shattered.
Right. Yeah. It's like an atomic bomb. There's just dust. And you have to start rebuilding who you are in the world, and also what the world looks like through a different lens, through, trying to be healthy with it. But the difficulty is you've got no blueprint, and the old blueprint's still hanging around, and it's actually saying, no, this should be built this way. Whereas you're going, no, I want it to be built differently. And sometimes it means that we do build things with the wrong blueprint, and we have to demolish them and start again. And that is very normal part of this process of healing, is that we make mistakes, or we find ourselves in a relationship with somebody who isn't as good for us as we thought they were. And then the difference is, and this is what it all comes back to, all of it, ultimately, and I don't know if you're going to like this very much, but it doesn't matter so much whether it's autism or trauma. What matters is that it's there and how it colours your perception, your behaviour, your interaction with other people, and that that if something is hurting you, you will remove yourself from it. Because you said, I don't trust other people. And actually, I said to you, it sounds more like you don't trust yourself. And when we are healing from trauma, for us to be able to exist in the world in healthy relationships where we can accept people either as they are with some red flags, or, definitely not that red flag, or whatever it might be, we know we can trust ourselves that as soon as we see something that is hurting us to the point that we shouldn't be in that relationship, we will get up and leave it. Because the minute we know that about ourselves, everyone else becomes safe. And that's really odd, I think, as a thing to say.
No, but I can see exactly what you mean. Because it removes that fear of other people, because you trust who you are and how you're going to react.
Yeah.
I completely understand that. Yeah.
So when you're in that hypervigilant state and you're assessing everything and you're looking at all the exits, you're looking at, how do I keep myself safe amongst all these people? And whilst there's space for that, absolutely, I think it's very sensible to know where the emergency exits are in a like shopping mall or a hotel or whatever. That's very reasonable. It's not to the point where it's all you can think about. And again, we have to look at, how is that helping us and why do we feel we need it? And if we can answer that, then we can maybe let go of it a little bit. And what are we also avoiding by staying in that state? Because the other part of this is really processing and feeling the emotion that went around what you experienced, both with the breakdown, with the drinking, with your mother's behavior towards you in that moment, but then your childhood, your father's behavior, and then even having to leave and remove yourself and let go of having a relationship with the person that you kept going back to, hoping it would be different.
Yes.
You know, the death of that hope, that is such grief. That's
Yeah.
so much. So it seems like almost maybe it's been safer just to cut all emotion off to protect yourself, because all emotion is threatening. And the reason I asked you earlier about how your mother reacted to your happiness, joy, pride, and then, you know, when you were younger and you talked about your nephew being born and that kind of stuff, and you being in the police, the reason I asked you that was to know how threatening your emotions are to you. And then you also said, on top of all of that, that the fear of kind of accessing that emotion, that it's there, it's this big, deep well, that
Yeah.
if you access it, you might end up kind of having another breakdown. And that being
Yeah.
hugely terrifying.
Well, it's massive because, you know, I've since I've come away from it, my life has changed so much, and I've achieved so much since I've been away from it. All of the things that I felt like I was never going to be able to do on my own. Okay, so I've been I've been to university. I'm about to finish a degree. I've got my own home. You know, I have new friends, and I'm close to my family. I've got, you know, a little job. I'm living in an area that I love, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I'm so frightened that it's just all going to fall apart. And it's not just about the emotions. It's also about there's this thing I think isn't there of if you've, like I was saying before, about you've lived in chaos.
Yes.
And that's how you've existed. So that's what your normal kind of like barometer for life should be, right? When things are going smoothly and there's no problems, I find that uncomfortable.
Of course you do. It's threatening as hell.
It's so threatening because I think this doesn't feel right because nobody's yelling, nobody's shouting, there's no drama.
Yeah.
And it's being comfortable with that.
Yes.
And I feel like I self-sabotage it sometimes.
Absolutely, because it's almost like, and I mean, again, I hate this word, but it's so normal because it's like being in the eye of the storm, isn't it? When it's calm, because it's like, well, I know something's coming, I just don't know when it's going to come, and we're just waiting for the next, or the shoe to drop, the other shoe to drop, right?
Yeah.
And we're sitting in that space. What I'm going to offer you in that is what I offer absolutely everyone, because I think nearly anybody who's grown up in that environment is going to experience the exact same thing of the fear of the calm, because almost that can trip you almost further into being hypervigilant. And like you said, self-sabotage it, find something to create a chaos.
Yes.
The thing that you have to remember when we're healing, one of the things I think we sort of set ourselves up to believe or expect is that I will be healed when bad things stop happening, or I stop having, and I'm going to use this inverted commas of bad emotions, right? I'll never feel sad again, and I'll never feel overwhelmed or stressed or anxious or any of these things, right? But actually, that's not what healing means. Healing means being self-aware, knowing where we're bringing old stuff into the present moment that may be colouring how we're seeing it, not necessarily discounting it, almost like saying that this situation I'm currently in isn't a problem because it's actually my trauma that's making it a problem. Well, it might be partly, but don't discount the fact that this situation also might be problematic because there's a reason your brain is going, this is dangerous, we felt this before, right?
Yeah.
Healing is about being able to trust ourselves, know ourselves, build our identity, build up a really good sense of who we are, build up our intrinsic self-worth and value, and know that our value to others is not dependent on what we offer them, knowing that we can face rejection and loss, but will be okay. Healing is not never feeling bad again. It's knowing that when we do, it will pass. We know it will pass, that we've got tools to draw on. And so when we think about you and the fear of a mental breakdown in, you know, and experiencing what you experienced before, look at how different everything is now. look at the environment you're in, look at your support system. You know, before you and I met, we obviously, as part of our kind of inviting people onto the podcast, there's a lot of safeguarding procedures that we go through to make sure that we're not doing harm. And
Yes.
I'm not going to disclose it, but you had commented something on your form that gave me cause to go, oh, I maybe need to check how safe you are in various different things in terms of support networks. So we had a little chat about it. And I was reassured that the environment you're in now is, and don't, you know, you have to be reassured. It's not my view of it is not necessarily the one to hold as like, well, Helen said it's okay. No, you know, you're the one to decide whether it's okay. But
I get that.
You're good. Your view of your description of your support network, of what our little conversation was about, what the thing was balanced and measured, insightful. It was self-aware. It was conscious. It was thoughtful. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't denial. It wasn't dismissal or minimizing or any of those things. You addressed it with me and you discussed it and you know, we talked about it.
Yeah.
Would you have done that whenever you were living, well, when you had the breakdown originally?
I don't think, no.
No.
I don't think so.
So what's different?
Oh, so, I mean, being in that situation all the time clouds you, doesn't it, right?
Of course.
You can't think or feel of anything else except for what you're going through and the pain that you're in. When you come away from it, you're able to process, you're able to learn. Yeah. You can look back with a more objective head.
Yeah.
And I look at it now as, without, you know, talking about the specific thing, I look at it now as it's just another path in my head of escape.
Exactly.
Right? And whereas now it's a shadow, it's a memory.
Okay.
You know, and I'm protected from that by what I have around me.
Right.
And by allowing myself to be part of things like this.
Okay.
And talking about it and letting it out.
So
and trying to navigate through it and trying to find a way to understand more and work on myself, you know.
Okay. So if that's the case, what is different now and when you have a problem than then when you had a problem?
Now I can talk to people and I get support.
Okay.
Measured, calm, thoughtful support. I don't get berated and shouted at and screamed at.
So the difference, the really big difference, you're not in an abusive environment right now.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I'm safe.
Right.
You know, and that's taken time to realise. I still have moments where I wobble. Yeah. I don't feel like I'm safe. I still, you know, I have things that trigger, I suppose, is the word. I don't like that word myself personally, but because I don't like the thought that there are things that can trigger me. I know that they do. It's a pride thing of being triggered by things.
Hear yourself. Can you hear what you're saying to me?
Yeah, I know. I say to people that I don't like it because it's just one of those, it's a word that people use too much, but I really don't like it because I think I'm ashamed of being triggered.
Okay. Your work around shame, your fear of not being perfect, of not being good enough, because of course the cost for you for not being perfect was awful.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So naturally you are fearful of being vulnerable or human, even just having the human experience. But that pride to be able to cope with all the stuff on your own, that's what trips us up.
Yeah.
Right?
I know. And nobody can, I know. And this is the first thing that I would say to anybody having problems is you can't do everything on your own.
Yeah.
I say it to my niece all the time. This is this constant thing of we can give advice, but we can't take it. Right.
Yeah.
I say to my niece all the time, she struggles to ask for help because she thinks she should be able to do it because her older brother can do it and all the friends can do it. And I said, but you are you. You're not them. You're you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And nobody gets through this life without asking for help.
Right. And also,
it's so frustrating.
I know, but it's such a wonderful thing to be able to do for people is to help.
Yeah.
Like my whole career is around that. but we have to do it where we're not costing ourselves, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, Patrick, we're just kind of coming to the end now, and I just wonder, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you, or questions that you've got left that I haven't answered? Is there anything, any thoughts or anything that I need to go over or clarify?
Not that I can really think of. I think, for me, it's just moving forward, how I'm going to take
Okay.
it and sort of, whether I should think about talking again, going back to having some sort of therapy, counselling to sort of let these things out and work on these things.
I think it would be a wonderful idea.
Yeah.
But with someone who really understands this experience.
Yes, that's it. And that's where I've actually struggled, I must say, because, it's finding somebody who actually understands, not just somebody who's just, because I've talked to people before they've said, well, I understand narcissistic relationships or parents or whatever it is. They've not been through it.
Yeah.
I just think you can read about it, but if you don't know how it feels to have that psychotic kind of, behavior thrown at you, it's difficult to talk to somebody about that.
100%. I absolutely agree. There is, on my website, and this is for anybody obviously listening, there is a directory of therapists who, there's only 3 of them on there because I'm very, very selective around who I recommend. And
it's good to hear.
They've trained with me and they know what they're talking about and they know what they're doing. So I highly recommend looking at any of those that are there. And then also, obviously, there's the hub you could look at joining, which is, we do courses each month. We did rejection in January. We did trust in February. We are doing, what are we doing? I've forgotten. How bad is that? We did rejection. Oh, no, we did self-awareness in January and learning how to be self-awareness. And then we did rejection, and then we're doing trust this month. And then we do live calls and everything else, like where people can do Q&As, not related to the content necessarily. Obviously, you can do that too. So, but there are also loads of other places and spaces like the Facebook groups and stuff. It's about finding people who have experienced it. You said earlier about not being able to talk like this to people around you because they haven't experienced it. And there's so much truth in that, especially when we're just trying to kind of really understand it, honour it and validate it for ourselves. What we don't want to do is give it to someone who then goes, well, that's not that big a deal. My mum did that. And you go, okay.
That's it. Well, there's that. There's definitely that. And I've definitely come across that. The other one is, but that's your mother. How can you behave like that to your mother? And I just think, what I always throw back to them is, if you had anybody in your life that treated you like that, what would you do with them? It wasn't your mother, say it was a friend or a co-worker, what would you do with them? And they give you the whole spiel about what they would do. And I think, well, so why did your mother get to treat you like that?
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't it worse that she's doing that?
Yeah. Yeah.
I do shut off to people, I'm afraid, when they start speaking like that. I just think that I can't deal with your energy.
Well, yeah, and I mean, one of my favourite responses to that is, why are you asking me to tolerate abuse for the sake of DNA?
Yes. Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't understand that. If my partner was doing that, you'd tell me to leave, as you kind of just said. And so, So I'm just going to come back again to your question about autism and trauma. There are definitely going to be aspects of it which are autism. I do wonder about ADHD. Obviously, I can't diagnose you. I'm not qualified to do that. But I would definitely be looking at that too. Things like people pleasing and those kinds of behaviours, the fear of saying no, are more likely to be trauma related. The thing about being autistic, especially late diagnosed, and especially in my generation, which, we're not too far apart age-wise, the world didn't understand it. And all we were told was sit still, stand up, do this. Why aren't you like the same as everyone else all the time? So there's going to be systemic trauma as well as familial. So your trauma is going to be twofold, if not three. There's going to be multi-layers to it, simply because when you're neurodifferent in a world that only caters towards neurotypical, you're going to have been left going, what the hell? And so what my invitation to you might be is finding autistic-friendly spaces where you're not having to mask and conform and pretend, where people don't get horrified because they say, does my bum look big in this? And you say, well, yeah. and then they get upset with you for it. So you ask a question, So I'm going to ask you to maybe think about that and whether or not there's spaces you can find where you can exist unmasked.
Do you mind if I just tell you a tiny
Please
little
do.
story?
I'd love it.
Right. I used to teach ballroom Latin dancing
No
as well.
way. Oh my God.
Yeah, way back when. Wait. That was around about the time that I was in the police as well, actually.
That's so
and
cool.
I did get told off one time by my instructor because when I was learning to teach, they would just sit you on the sidelines and you would watch the couples doing their dances. And this couple was doing their dance and they finished it. And my instructor come up to me and she said, "Patrick, you need to watch your facial expression."
Yeah.
I was like, "What do you mean?" She said, "I can see you going like, you like frowning and
The autistic
like wrinkling your
non-filter,
nose and everything." And I was just like, "Oh my God, I didn't even realize I was doing it." She said, "Yeah, you need to kind of try and not show it because the couples look over and see you look as frowning at them, they're going to think they're doing something wrong, even if they're not."
Oh yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
No, that's brilliant. I mean, it's just, I can wonder how many people can relate to that because yes, I only had it said to me a couple of weeks ago. You're so easy to read was the comment, and I'm like, I'm not surprised. I just forget to filter my face, and it's just an accident.
I can't help it.
Yeah.
It's there, it comes out. So yeah.
But then, do you know what's great is that there are people who will love that about you, that they'll be able to connect with you on the basis that you don't have to guard your feelings and your facial reaction, the responses. So
yeah,
absolutely.
I have actually, since I moved up here, I've had one person who said to me, "You'll just say anything, won't you?"
Yeah, I will.
I will, but that's kind of it. But I think that's a really good point about finding your space, with other autistic people because the masking is tiring.
It is tiring, and it does lead to burnout, and it also means that you're not creating authentic relationships. Every time you put a filter on, whether it's people pleasing or autism or whatever other filters we've got going on, to make the other person more comfortable, every time you do that, you are being inauthentic. And there are places like work where that's appropriate, that we have to have levels of filter. But, in our connected personal relationships, the safest ones are the least filtered ones. And that we're not punished for not having those filters. So let's look at the bullshit filter of people who ask me to filter myself to make them more comfortable. No, I don't want to be in a relationship with them. Okay.
Yeah.
Patrick, thank you so much. That has been wonderful to talk to you. Thank you for sharing and being so honest and brave and clear. And I hope it's been good for you too. And
it's been incredible. It really has, and I must say, it's been a pleasure to talk to you as well.
Likewise.
I was really, really happy that you invited me to come on. So, thank you so much, and for your advice as well.
Well, thank you. My absolute pleasure. It's been a joy to speak to you too.
Thank you.
And I guess on that note, all that remains to be said is thank you and take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.